Nail inks. What are they and how do you use them? Nail art inks are generally an alcohol-based product that applies wet and dries down without curing. While I've been doing nail art for about 5 years now, I only really started exploring inks within the last year. While I had very little idea of what I was doing with them at the start, I've really grown to appreciate just how versatile they can be. My goal is to start with an overview of the different types of inks you can find and basic blending techniques before showing you 7 specific designs you can make with them. Flowers, check patterns, lace, character art, marbled nails, and more. And that's just scratching the surface of what you can do. I know when I first started exploring inks, they felt pretty daunting with so many techniques you can use, and so I hope this video can just be a helpful guide to get you started, because I think they are just such a cool medium to work with. So if that sounds good to you, please continue watching. Please consider subscribing if you like this sort of nail art video, but let's begin by addressing what are inks and what types can you buy. Alcohol-based inks have been a medium used in many different art forms for a long time, but at least in my experience though, it seems like it's been in recent years that they've become more popular with nail artists, especially since brands are now creating nail-specific ink products. While I'm not an expert on the ingredients, especially as the ones that I've mostly used are Korean and Japanese products, what I do know is that the general formula consists of pigments suspended in some sort of alcohol-based solution that will evaporate off the surface of the nail, leaving the pigments behind. That's how you get the really cool watercolor effect where the pigment is stronger around the edges. While there are acrylic inks and alcohol inks made for resin art and other crafts, you can apply those to nails, but this video specifically will cover products marketed specifically as nail inks, as they may have a slightly different formulation than say the alcohol inks or acrylic inks that you would use for resin art. Now when it comes to the different finishes for inks, I would categorize them in 3 categories: opaque, shimmers or glitters, and transparents. One ink that I recommend everybody have as a basic is an opaque white. This one is from Doughy. Now you can also find colored opaque inks that are just colored pigments mixed with some sort of white base, like these pastel ones from the Favori. You'll notice that they'll look cloudy even when they're not mixed. In comparison, there are some more neon transparent colors that you can get, such as these ones here, the Juicy Pop collection from the Favori. And you can see here that the pigments are mixed into more of a clear base, which means that they have more sheerness when applied and are really good for layering. And then there are also specialty shimmer and glitter inks that just have really fine shimmer particles or larger glitter particles mixed in. Okay, so how do we actually apply inks? The first thing I do recommend is working on a matte surface. You're just going to get more even coverage and better blends that way. I have experienced some luck working on top of a cleansed surface, meaning after applying a gel color, you wipe away the tacky layer and you're left with a semi-matte surface. And that can work okay for a basic application like you can see here, but for the best blend, I do recommend a matte nail. For matte polishes, I find that the ones recommended for colored pencil or watercolor art work best with inks. You have the Maymud Matte Top, Yoga Mayo Yummy Matte Art Gel, and then the Peruka Watercolor Matte Art Gel, which is also a non-wipe. These are just the ones that I've experimented with and I'm partial to, but of course, if you have a favorite matte top coat, definitely try it out and see if it works for you. Before using an ink, you really want to make sure that you mix it super well to incorporate those pigment particles with the alcohol solution. If you don't mix it well enough, it can go on a little bit streaky. Once it's fully incorporated, you want to move kind of quickly and brush it over the matte surface in whatever design you would like. If you wait too long, the brush can dry out and cause streaks in the ink, which that actually may be a look you're going for. It just depends. If you want more pigmentation, you can either apply the ink in thin layers, letting it dry in between. This is going to give you the most even color payoff. Or you could apply more product all at once, but you should note that the color payoff is not going to be quite as even since those pigments are going to pool around the edges. Now for those edges, you can either leave them the way they are for that really neat watercolor effect, or you can blend them. When it comes to blending products, there are a few options. Some brands will actually sell their own blending liquids, like this one here from Doughy. It comes as part of their Marbly set, which is one of my go-tos for nail art inks. I know the Favori also has their own blending liquid, and here's what it looks like to blend with that brand-specific product. Since they are made to work with inks, they do blend really smoothly and give you a nice gradient, but you can also just use acetone. I recommend unscented 100% pure acetone. and you just apply a little bit to a brush and then blend out the edges just like you would with the blending liquid. I have noticed though, acetone dries faster, so you must work a little bit quicker, and you also want to be careful to not use too much or blend over the same area too many times to avoid the acetone eating away at your base coat. So really your preference is up to you. If you are going to be using two different colors, you can actually blend them together using the ink itself. Since they do contain that solution, the binding solution, you can just use the new ink to blend out the edge of the other, and it can create some really pretty marbled effects. Now, despite them being called alcohol inks, I would not attempt to blend nail art inks with alcohol. It's just not going to move those pigments fast enough for you to get a nice blended edge. What you can use alcohol for though is cleaning up any design that you decide you dislike and you want to remove from the nail. Just take some alcohol on some sort of lint-free wipe, rub it on the surface, and eventually you can take away all of that ink. Acetone is an option here too, but again, you want to avoid using too much acetone to eat away at the polish that's underneath the design. So now that you know the basics, let's get into some specific nail designs you can create with inks. Starting with a checkered plaid gingham design. It's super basic and I think perfect for the fall season. To showcase this design, I'll be using the new Multi-Fu collection from Yogurt Nail. And you want to start with a base color of your choice and of course a matte top coat. I've just used the Yummy Matte from Yogo Mayo. And I picked out two of the inks that I thought would complement each other. Starting with the purple color, we're going to lay a vertical stripe down the edge of the nail. Let that dry down completely and then lay down a horizontal stripe of the other color. Try to do this in as few strokes as possible to avoid disturbing the ink underneath. And then I'm going in and doing one skinnier vertical stripe, again letting the layers dry down in between, and then using that first color to do another horizontal stripe. If you angle your brush, you can get a thinner stripe. I'm using just the corner there. And once all of that is dried down, I'm going to be taking a liner brush and just some white gel paint. This one is the D-Gel white liner. And I'm just adding little stitch marks down the center of those thick vertical lines. I personally like using inks as sort of like a background pattern and then using other elements, other products to really add details to the look. Here the white just really makes that design pop and really sells the fabric look. I'm just adding in some more white highlights, going over the middle of those skinnier stripes, and then adding two additional white lines alongside those thicker stripes, making sure not to overlap certain parts. That way it looks like all of these different elements are woven together as if they were actual fabric. And once that's done, it's time for a matte top coat and you have your plaid nail. This look is really so versatile. You can do it with as many or as few colors as you like. It's really just all about the layering and then adding those final white details at the end. For our next design, I'm going to show you how to create a simple lace pattern. You'll start with an opaque white ink and you just want to lay this down in whatever shape you want your lace to be. In this case, I'm just doing a little organic looking stripe across the center of the nail. Try not to disturb the ink here too much because you do want a pretty even layer of this over the area. If some of the ink does pool, that's okay because we are working with fabric which tends to fold and bunch anyway, but make sure you let that completely dry down before moving on to the next step. You'll take a liner brush and again a white gel liner of choice and just start drawing little scallops along the edge of your lace. You can actually customize this step. If you don't want to do scallops, you could do little dots instead or any other sort of edge that you would like to add. The ink, since it has that slight transparency, it just creates a nice base to work with. Go ahead and repeat the same thing on the other side of the lace and then give that a full cure before moving on to the next step. Now we're going to take that same white liner paint and just use a dotting tool to make dainty little flowers along the center of the lace band. Again, this step is fully customizable. I've done hearts before. You can do any sort of little design that you might find on lace. You just want to make sure that you're using an opaque white gel so that it contrasts nicely with that semi-sheer ink underneath. Go ahead and give that a full cure and then add a matte top coat for a perfect fabric look, and you are done. I just think this is such a fun, beginner-friendly, hand-painted design that you can do. You could use any color really that you would like. I think it would look great in black as well. And there are just so many options for customization. Another simple hand-painted design that I love doing with inks are flowers. This time I'm going to show you what a more transparent ink looks like. So I'm using this pink from the Juicy Pop collection, and I'm just going to go in with the corner of the brush itself and draw on little petal shapes over a matte surface. You can see that with this ink, it does have that more sheer transparency to it. You can build up the color and get more vibrancy, or you can lay down a really thin layer and get more of a transparent effect. Here though, I want these flowers to pop, so I'm making sure that each little petal is fully saturated. You can always go back over with more ink to bump up the vibrancy. I would just recommend letting it dry in between. And this is just such a fun, easy way to get some really nice painterly details that look like you spent a long time on them, but really you didn't. And I'm just adding another flower here. Again, this look is customizable. You could do a different color flower if you choose, just using the corner of that brush to create those petal shapes. You do want to be careful though not to overlap your petals, that way you get really distinct petal shapes. If you overlap, because this product is so liquidy, you could risk them running together and losing some of that definition. But I let that dry, and then I go in with an even smaller flower just to fill up some more of the space here. You could potentially take a nail art brush and dip it into your ink bottle and use like a smaller liner to get more precise shapes. But I personally like the kind of asymmetrical unevenness of the flowers. I think it makes them look more organic. So I just let that dry down, and you could stop there after top coating it, but I like adding a little bit of extra pizzazz with some chrome details. So I paint on a matte top coat, and then I'm using the Pala First Street liner just to outline a couple of those flower shapes and add a few stamen in the center of the flowers. As I mentioned before, I think inks look really good as like a backdrop, and then adding some sort of precise outlines, some extra details really just brings the look together. There's just a nice contrast between having those sharp edges versus the more flowy shapes from the inks. That just feels really satisfying. So I cure the palette gel and then rub in my Nail Bio Gold Chrome, and we're left with this really pretty flower pattern. I do top this off to seal in that gold chrome, but if you're not using chrome, if you're just using a textured art gel to add some white highlights or some black outlines, you could leave it as it is. Again, this is just a base technique that you can play around with to create something of your own. Up next, let's talk marble nails. This is a perfect place for shimmer inks, so I'm starting with one coat of a syrup color, already cured and cleansed, and I'll be using some glitters from the Favori. This one here is the green from the Bling Edition 2, and I'm just going to paint that on in sections over the nail. I do want to keep some areas glitter free so that you have the variety, and you don't have to be careful with this at all. You just want a glittery effect over some parts of the nail. I do this in a couple layers to really build up that glitter, having it be a little bit more dense in some places rather than others. And once that's fully dried down, I go back in with that same syrup gel. This one is from Yogurt Nail Korea, and I am going to focus this over the areas where there isn't any of that shimmer ink. However, I am going to blend it out over the shimmer just so that you have some areas where you have the glitter layered underneath that syrup gel. And after curing that, I'm going to go in on top of that with a gold shimmer this time. This one is also from the Favori, and I'm just laying that in two sections as well, overlapping some of the places where that other glitter has been laid down. And here I'm going to blend out the edges with some acetone on a brush, just so that I get rid of some of those harsh lines. For marbled nails, you really want a mix of harsh edges, but also soft blends. So I'm just taking away some of those harsh edges, while also leaving some of those crisp lines for variety. And here's what it looks like after our first round of blending. Since marble nails are all about the layering, I go back in with that green ink and I just add a little bit more of that over top some of the gold. And then I will be matte top coating this because I want to go in and add some white veins without disturbing the pattern underneath. So after matte top coating, I'm going in with the doughy white, and I'm just creating a sideways Y shape here. And I want to let this dry down completely before going in with that blending liquid and just blending out one of those harsh edges. Again, you want a mix of blended edges, but also some of those harsh lines to create that veined look that you find in quartz and gemstones. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. If you blend away too much of the white, you can go in and add a little bit more of the white ink and repeat the same process, which is what I'm doing here. This style is something that you just kind of have to practice and get the feel for, but the best advice I think I can give is to try to work in diagonal shapes. So lots of V shapes, Y shapes, N shapes. Have the lines moving diagonally over the nail rather than straight up and down for a more organic effect. Once you're happy with the white veining, go ahead and give this a top coat and you are done. While there are other ways to create really intricate quartz or marble looks, I personally find that nail art inks are a really easy, accessible, beginner-friendly technique. Speaking of beginner-friendly, let's talk smoke nails. So smoke is something that can be really difficult to achieve, but I find it's quite easy with a nail art ink. You want to start by laying down a marble base if you have it, but you can also use a regular base coat in a pinch. Just apply a pretty thick layer and do not cure it. Instead, you want to dot some of the ink over the surface of the uncured gel and just let it start to bloom. Then you can take some sort of dotting tool or a stick and swirl that into whatever smoke pattern you would like. I do recommend a marble base. As you can see here, the base coat doesn't allow it to spread quite as much as I would have liked, but it does still work. If you lose definition, you can add more pigment to some areas. Again, just use a dotting tool or something to swirl it around. Give that a cure and you are left with an easy smoke design. This also works really well if you're using a builder gel in some sort of dual forms. I recently did this with a claw nail set if you want to check out the video linked in the corner. But let's move on to some easy abstract nuance art. Inks are synonymous with nuance art in my head, so I'm starting with a base color laid down already under a matte top coat, and then I'm just taking a couple different colors of inks and putting little streaks of it on the surface of the nail. I'm actually not waiting for each ink layer to dry, that way they do blend together a little bit, and I'm using a pretty liberal amount to just get some good pigmentation. I do let the colors dry before adding on top of that just a little bit of a white shimmer ink. I want the shimmer to be distinct, so I am applying that, letting it fully dry before going over with more of that colored ink just to build up the opacity. I'm being really careful here with these new layers to dab on the ink rather than to brush it on to avoid any streaking. And after you let that fully dry, give it a top coat and you have a super simple nuanced design. This took me maybe 5 minutes to complete, so it's definitely beginner friendly and a great way to use up a variety of different ink colors and finishes. And for our last design, let's talk character art. I love using inks for character art. I think it lends itself really well to the cartoony effect. So I'm just starting here with the head of our bear, laying down a circle of the ink. I'm just focused on outlining the shape here before going in with a second layer to bump up the pigmentation. And then I will let that fully dry so that I can add the ears without disturbing the shape underneath. The ears are simple enough, just 2 little dots at the top of the head. You want to use a good amount of ink here so that you get that nice outlined effect. And once you're happy with the general shape, I am adding another layer of the Yummy Matte top coat because I'm actually going to combine this with some colored pencil art. I think as a medium, colored pencils and ink just go so well together, especially for this sort of cartoony style of character art. So I just cure my matte top coat, wipe down the surface, and then I go in with a colored pencil to outline our little bear shape. The good news with this design is that you can be a little bit wobbly with your lines. The whole point is to have it look very hand-drawn, very stylized. And while I went with black for the outline here, you can use any colored pencil color that you would like. So you could do a bright pink or a bright blue for a more whimsical look. And then I'm just going to be adding a couple little doodles with another colored pencil just to add to that cartoony effect. You could also use gel pens here or a fine-tipped marker. I've experimented with both those before and they work really well on top of this matte surface. But for the finishing touch, I'm just going to be taking one of the pink colors from the Yogurt Nail collection and I'm just going to be adding little dots for blushed cheeks. Let that fully dry, top coat that with a matte top coat, and your character art is finished. I love using inks for character art because you don't have to be super precise, which means the technique is super beginner friendly while still looking stylized and polished. So that was it for the ink designs. I hope this video has been helpful. Some of the key takeaways I would say are that inks are all about layering and understanding how those pigments pool around the edges and how you can use that to your advantage to create simple shapes that can then be layered for more complex looks. It's great for fabrics because it has that sheer quality, great for abstract nuance art because of the way the ink flows like paint, and just great for experimenting overall in general and getting you to step out of your comfort zone. If you have a favorite technique that you like to use with nail art inks, definitely comment them down below. But I hope this video has been helpful. Please consider subscribing, giving the video a like if you think it was. I do have other guides on my channel that I will try to link in the description if you would like to check those out. But I hope you are having a wonderful day wherever you are. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all for the next one. Bye.